The fires of hatred are not so hot as the ice of betrayal is cold. You're probably going to have to kill them, Maria. I looked up to see a fearsome pair of eyes staring back at me, carnelian hazel, as smooth and clear as glassy orbs of polished amber. A ring of shadow enveloped those fossilized flames like the savage countenance of a demon, her gaze just as petrifying. A wreath of garnet red hair flowed down around her cheeks, framing her face like a vermilion portal to hell. Her lips, alizarin crimson, pursed and contorted in serious expression, much as they had always been. A sinister scowl that had known the taste of blood and relished it. It never used to bother me before, but recently I couldn't shake the chilling sensation that she was peering right through me, reading my mind, scanning intently for any signs of weakness or betrayal. She was certainly no inquisitor, but in many ways I wondered if perhaps that wasn't worse, since at least they understood what a soul was and what it meant to have one. I started to wonder whether hers was still intact, or if it had been pawned off ages ago to an all-too-hungry ghost, leaving only a hollow shell behind. "Did you hear me?" she asked coldly. "I heard you, Cadenza," I replied, trying to put on a brave face and steel myself against her prying gaze, lest she discover the festering darkness growing deep inside me. The lines of battle paint dripping down her face caught my attention and snapped me from my hypnotic trance long enough to remember the purpose of why we'd gathered here. We were setting up for our next mission. Cadenza squinted, noting something was wrong. She could tell I hadn't been my usual self of late, normally so calm and stoic and detached like her and the rest of our sisters, so clear in our purpose. "Are you all right?" she prodded, slowly, chillingly, her words drawn out like the sword of an assassin from its sheath. Calculated, cunning, deliberate. "I'm fine," I replied. "I'm sensing your cortisol levels rising," she countered, "and there's a 5% increase in cutaneous moisture, as well as a marked decrease in overall core temperature. All signs of a cold sweat." I closed my eyes and said nothing to her, outwardly pretending not to care, while secretly hoping she might lose interest if I didn't make a big deal of it. My heart started pounding in my chest. I tried to control my breathing, but her cybernetic enhancements clued her in to all these changes as well. A din of chaotic voices whispered conflicting instructions in my mind. Cadenza sighed heavily, relaxing her shoulders, and pressed her palm to my forehead. Her touch burned from the heat transference, and the suddenness of her proximity caused me to shiver involuntarily. She removed her hand, recoiling in shock, her eyes growing wide for a moment. Time slowed around us as I met her gaze, and I began to wonder if she'd secretly received any upgrades recently that might allow her to detect my thought patterns and learn of the heretic within their midst, that my sympathies for the fallen would be made known, and my inner treason manifest, that she would hence shine a light upon my emotional demons and summon them forth to be culled in the purifying flames of mortal combat. Instead, her eyes were sad, concerned even, with her shadowy lids sagging about her sockets like oozing black lava. She sealed away the glow of those amber orbs and pressed her lips upon my forehead in motherly affection. Even when we'd engaged in passionate sex, I had never known her to be so tender and caring before, which only heightened my suspicion and put me further on edge. "You'll burn," she said softly, opening her eyes as she backed away. My own shot open as I tried to read her meaning in those dark carnelian spheres. I'd heard those words before, even uttered them myself at times. My mind rushed immediately to the most sinister interpretation I could imagine, and it made me incredibly fearful and sick to think she might know everything already and have rendered summary judgment without so much as trying to understand or correct my affliction. My lips began to quiver, which doubtless only made her more concerned. I held my breath, my mouth agape and silent, waiting for her to clarify the verdict. "You'll burn up," Cadenza whispered, "if you don't tend to that fever of yours." I breathed a heavy sigh of relief. Our vermilion-haired squad leader wasn't exactly known for her mercy or compassion, instead preferring the cold calculus of dogmatic obedience to our cause. Purest zealot that she was, my hot-headed sister's wrath was legendary, as was her commitment to the flawless success of any mission Vindication levied upon her. She was a calculating machine, with the singular purpose of excellence and execution of our empire's will upon the world. Her loyalty and devotion were both beyond question, and she would put down anyone who so much as felt the wrong way about any of it. I had seen it many times with my own eyes, and been at her side through much of it, even aiding in that cause on multiple occasions. A most dangerous woman indeed, my beloved sister of fire and fury. "Have you been under a lot of stress lately?" Cadenza asked. I lied and told her no. Thankfully, I'd been trained how to lie imperceptibly, and my prosthetic enhancements aided in suppressing any unconscious micro-expressions. Perhaps they'd been malfunctioning, and that was the reason for my lingering doubts, though all my routine system checks came back clean. Short of disclosure to a technician, there'd be no way to tell for sure, and obviously I wasn't about to do that. "Are you sure?" Cadenza insisted. "Do you need to talk to someone about it?" Again, I told her no. "We've always been so close, you and I," she whispered. "All the missions we've performed together. You know, if you need someone to talk to, you can always tell me anything." The sinister look on her face did nothing to calm me down or earn my trust, however. Less so when she made it clear how she couldn't have anyone keeping secrets around here. That the success of our operation depended on total transparency and total intimacy. We operated as one, and that was the source of our effectiveness. Unity breeds strength. I scowled and fired back a ferocious look of my own, brushing her concerns aside in an outward showing of perfect moral clarity. The one language I knew she spoke above all others was that of blind obedience to authority and power. "I'm fine," I barked. "I can do the mission." Cadenza smiled a devilish grin and folded her arms across her chest, beaming with pride and relief. That's the Maria I remember, the one I know and love. Compared to what I felt for Eris, I wasn't so sure I'd call it love, but then my conditioning bade me to consider that meaning is subjective, and it wasn't my place to dictate other people's feelings, especially when they were heartfeltly expressed the way Cadenza's were. If she said she loved me, then that was the end of it, and it wasn't my place to tell her she was wrong or to impose my own personal interpretation upon her words. Her speech was the natural result of her own lived experiences that I could never fully understand, and I owed it to her to be open-minded and receive them as she meant them. "Anyways," Cadenza continued, "this mission is important, and I need to make sure you're up to the task, Maria." "I told you I can do it," I said, now becoming irate and downright defensive. Suddenly, it was she who wasn't respecting my boundaries, my feelings, my meaning, and my thoughts, and that triggered me deeply. Though, secretly, it also came as a welcome distraction from the nagging philosophical dilemma I'd been having within my own head, along with its accompanying risk of discovery. Cadenza backed off, feeling confident in my resolve. If nothing else, she knew enough to know that negative emotions were the gateway to a person's true nature, and I was still every bit the dedicated firebrand she needed me to be, if only because I had to be. As I said, she continued, you'll probably have to kill them. Which ones? I asked, forgetting myself in the heat of our exchange. The priestesses, of course, she said sharply. Oh, right, I replied contritely. Idiot that I was. That'd been the entire point of our briefing, to lay out a plan for how to squeeze them into compliance, and what to do if we didn't get the answers that Vindication required. I'm not sure why the thought of killing children never bothered me before, or why it suddenly bothered me now. Perhaps it was because our sense of attachment to them had been severed, our maternal instincts no longer functioning, for they were no longer needed. Like everything else in our world, we had delegated such traits to the sole dominion of the matriarch. Or maybe it was just easier to go along with my programming and the dogma that taught me their kind would grow up to be little monsters, and it was easier to put them down while they were still young, rather than run the risk of reinfecting our society. Was this a byproduct of my having been born in a time before the purge? Did the others ever harbor doubts like this? Or was I simply succumbing to a most pernicious and inconvenient fever like she'd said? Either way, this was no time to be growing a conscience. There was work to be done. Cadenza led the escort, as always, our ride ever stoic and silent. No idle gossip or sororal chattering, no talk of plans and pleasantries while en route, lest we become distracted by emotion and draw our senses away from the threat of danger and sin all around. Nothing but cold robotic sociopathy and rationale could keep us focused on what had to be done. A truly monstrous act if thought about. I tried to console myself with the knowledge that it was better to use violence when violence was necessary than to put on the cloak of cowardice. That such was a quality more contemptible than any other, and neither Cadenza nor Vindication would stand for it. However, being left alone with my dark thoughts was perhaps the greatest risk we faced. Our journey was fairly uneventful. Cadenza broke the silence only once, to ask me again if I was sure I didn't need help. She seemed sincere in her offering, and, for one brief moment, I had considered turning myself in and asking for clemency. Out of fear, however, or perhaps even just a sense of false pride and duty to my sisters, I once again allayed her concerns about me, in lieu of my devotion to our cause. She took my hand, and I could feel the warmth leave her body as her very touch burned my battle-hardened skin. She kissed me on the temple and whispered softly in my ear, "That's a good girl, Maria. I know I can always count on you." As awkward as I felt in that moment, I allowed it. What tragic pit of hell might I fall into if Cadenza learned just how weak I truly was, and how disappointed in me she'd be after all we'd been through together? How hurt she would feel, and how angry at my emotional and mental betrayal of this, our otherwise perfect family. I suppressed my nausea and held back my tears, grimacing in unseen pain, hoping her alarms wouldn't go off upon detecting my heightened disgust at myself. Maybe I could discuss it with her later, I thought. We arrived at the drop-off point, and Cadenza bid me good luck, offering up a prayer to invoke the blessings of the great goddess. This was to be a solo mission from here on out, and I would report back to her when it was finished. Until then, I was more or less alone. A small comfort, I supposed, but one that was necessary to avoid incurring the wrath of Cadenza.